Welcome to the Big Seance Podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance. Welcome and come on in. We are 1 week away from Halloween, and along with the normal candles, today our seance table is decked out with some fall leaves, maybe some vintage Bystol decorations, and let's say there's even a bowl of that chewy candy wrapped in the plain black or orange wax paper. Remember those? And perhaps there's a great big jack-o'-lantern sitting right in the middle. Is he a friendly jack-o'-lantern? Does he have that classic look with triangle eyes and like 3 teeth? You imagine it, and it'll be on our seance table today. I've really been waiting with such excitement to share this episode because it's with the nation's leading expert on Halloween, Lesley Bannatyne. But stay with me to the very end because I have some listener feedback and I want to let you know what's coming up on the Big Seance podcast for the next couple of weeks. Thanks for listening today, and here we go. Well, what better guest to have than the nation's #1 Halloween expert, author Lesley Bannatyne. I've heard many of her interviews. We've seen her on the History Channel, and I absolutely love her books. And 2 years ago, I wrote a review on BigSeance.com of her first book, Halloween, An American Holiday and American History. If you are a giant Halloween nerd such as myself, and you do not know about this lady, then you have got some catching up to do and a lot of fun reading. It's an honor having you here today, Miss Bannatyne. How are you?
Hi, thank you, Patrick. I am fine.
It's an exciting time of year for you, I bet. Your life just gets really busy.
It's kind of like being a superhero. You know, for 1 month, maybe 2 months out of the year, I do get really busy. I talk Halloween 24/7, and then November 1st comes, and it all just kind of like I woke up and I'm Clark Kent again. It's done. Come November 1st, we're on to Christmas.
And it's like a Halloween hangover, perhaps.
It is. It takes me a while to recover.
Yeah.
Pack stuff away, put the decorations in the basement. It's very sad.
I agree. I sometimes feel the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, let's get started and read your bio. Lesley Bannatyne is an American author who writes extensively on Halloween, especially its history, literature, and contemporary celebration. Bannatyne is also a freelance journalist who's covered stories ranging from druids in Somerville, Massachusetts, to relief workers in Bolivia. One of the country's foremost authorities on Halloween, Bannatyne has shared her knowledge on television specials for the History Channel, like The Haunted History of Halloween and The Real Story of Halloween, with Time Magazine, Slate, National Geographic, and contributed the Halloween article to World Book Encyclopedia. In 2007, she and several compatriots set the Guinness World Record for largest Halloween gathering, a title they held until 2009. Lesley has written 5 books on Halloween, ranging from a children's book, Witch's Night Before Halloween, to her latest book, Halloween Nation, which shows the holiday through the eyes of its celebrants. The book was nominated for a 2011 Bram Stoker Award. Her other titles are A Halloween How-To, Costumes, Parties, Destinations, Decorations, a Halloween reader, poems, stories, and plays from Halloween's past. And of course, Halloween, an American holiday, an American history, which celebrates 25 years in print in 2015. Lesley lives and works in Somerville, Massachusetts. So let's get the serious questions out of the way first. Like, what was your favorite Halloween candy?
Oh, gosh, that is serious. As a kid, it was hands down Three Musketeers. But growing up now, I've got to say I'm a Snickers fan.
Oh, I am also a Snickers fan.
Yeah, there's nothing I don't like about it.
The only thing that would make Snickers better, I think, is some peanut butter. And I guess they do have, the peanut butter varieties of Snickers as well. Do you have a favorite costume or maybe a most memorable costume?
Wow. This is a long lifetime of costumes you're asking about.
or two or three, maybe even.
I've got a whole closet now of witchwear because it's a classic and it's my go-to costume if I have to pull one out really quickly. When I was a kid, my dad made us costumes, and this was great because he was always busy. He sold insurance. He was always busy, but come Halloween, he would just stop and make something for my brother and me. And we were once Antony and Cleopatra, which was bad for me because I was Cleopatra and he had me wheeling my little brother in a wheelbarrow all night long. It's Antony. The grown-ups saw the humor in that. Me, not so much. We were dice. One year I was a firecracker. They were wonderful costumes. I would say those are among my favorites just because, it's great to have your dad build you a costume.
I bet. And to have parents that just so jump right in and let you have fun with that is awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you have a favorite memory? I know this must be like one of the toughest questions ever.
Well, in general, I did get my first kiss on Halloween, but I was about 12 and I was a cat and he was Zorro, and it was kind of like a punch, it was quick and it was over. I didn't know what happened. It was confusing. So, but that did leave an imprint on me. That was important. But I would say in general, the feeling of Halloween as a kid and being out, and this was before parents came with you out trick-or-treating in a gang of kids, the only thing that comes close to it may be playing capture the flag with a bunch of cousins late at night in the summertime. There's that running around freedom that you just don't get anymore. And I actually still feel that sometimes on Halloween, even though I'm a grown-up.
So now those serious questions are out of the way now. When people ask about the history of Halloween or where it came from, it seems like there's no simple answer. And it can get kind of confusing. Fortunately, your first book opens up by very clearly introducing us to the many traditions that end up blending together to form what we know as Halloween today. And I know it's probably your most asked question, but can you talk to us a bit about where Halloween came from?
Yes, I can. And you're right. There are lots of different questions to that, and questions. I'll start in Europe in the very beginning because Halloween in this country, where it came from here in America, is different from where it came from. But it first shows up in northwestern Europe. That's Ireland and Scotland, England, Wales, as a time of year called Samhain, which was around November 1st. And it seemed to be more like a Thanksgiving than what we think of as Halloween. It was a time for the tribes to come back from their summer pastures and make a home for the winter. So this is an agricultural society before, where the seasons were incredibly important, pastoral, moving flocks, getting food in for the winter. And it was a time to gather together. All that we know about it comes from stories that medieval Catholic monks wrote down in Ireland. And what they were trying to do was get these stories before they disappeared. And what they were also trying to do was give Ireland kind of a mythological past in the way that Greece had one, or Rome. So we have this group of stories, sagas, which includes this time called Samhain, and that's basically what we know about it, which is very little. gathering of the tribes, games, boasting. Mythologically, when it appears in stories, kings are slain, great loves are consummated. So one thing that it shares with Halloween today is that it was a time when the other world was present, and you could kind of get lost in the other world on Samhain, or creatures, monsters, could come from the other world into your world. And that's the part of Halloween that we still have, this idea that there are supernatural beings about. And so that kind of turned into folklore and superstition, and different people kept this alive until, when the church came in, they called the time All Hallows, All Saints' Day, or Hallows and Saints are the same thing. And so that's where we get the name for Halloween, All Hallows Eve, the night before All Hallows, which was November 1st. That was much later, but the church also brought, besides the name, a kind of a otherworldly mojo to the time of year, because they put All Souls Day, November 2nd, next to it. And that is a day to pray for the dead and to remember the dead and to ask things from the dead like information or wisdom or forgiveness. And so they built this interactive relationship between the dead and the living that added to this kind of spooky idea of Samhain. And so those two things together came down to us in America through the folklore of people like the Irish or the Scots that came to this country in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. So that's how it kind of arrived here, was in folklore.
A lot of culture like slamming together to create what we have.
Yeah, slamming together here, and then, we're such a country full of immigrants that we get immigrants from everywhere, and they all have superstitious beliefs, and they all have feelings about witches and darkness and the coming winter. And so they kind of, all this superstition and folklore whirled around together in the United States, which is why we have such a great spooky kind of literature and folklore. But Halloween itself didn't get here full bore on until at least the Victorians, which is like late 19th century. They throw the first Halloween parties. Until then, Halloween was just a night for pranks. And there were many nights for pranks. There were many nights for pranks. Not just Halloween, but under the cover of October darkness, a lot of things happened in this country that were explained by spirits. Fences went missing, furniture appeared in your treetop, kids would cover door handles with molasses or put grease on the trolley tracks, build piles of stones in the middle of Main Street. All sorts of mischief happened around Halloween. That's what it was first. And then Victorian times, they loved parties. They started throwing the first Halloween-themed parties.
I definitely have some Victorian questions later. It is I would love to take a time machine back to the Victorian days. When did Guy Fawkes Day come into play? Is that something kind of off on the side? And is that where the mischief kind of comes in a little bit?
It is on the side. You're right about that. And yes, there was mischief. I got to say, the darkness and the weather have a lot to do with mischief. It's that time of year when the dark comes early, you can get away with a lot more stuff. So yeah, there's mischief associated with Guy Fawkes, but also with Halloween and with April Fools and with New Year's Eve and with the 4th of July later on. It kind of coalesces around a holiday. But Guy Fawkes is a British holiday, and it came from the gunpowder plot that was foiled. Guy Fawkes is going to blow up the House of Parliament, and he's a Catholic. The House is Protestant. There's a lot of acrimony between those two religions. The plot is foiled. Fawkes is caught. He's executed. And from that point on, Protestant-leaning governments celebrate this day as Guy Fawkes Day, the day they got the bad guy. Catholics feel a little differently about it. But in England, because it was an English thing, there has been a Guy Fawkes celebration ever since then on November 5th. So it's close to Halloween, and it involves a lot of the same things, like fireworks, fires, effigies. They burn the guy in effigy, parades, pranks, things that are also associated with Halloween in that part of the world. So in some places like England, Guy Fawkes was much more important for a while. In places like Catholic Ireland, not so much. So it all depends on where you lived, what you did in late October, early November.
So trick-or-treating, it's a tradition that is really bizarre when you stop and think about it. One of my loyal readers and listeners, Carbon Lilies, has submitted 2 questions on the topic of trick-or-treating. When and why did the giving of candy become part of the Halloween canon? They also want to know when the practice of wearing costumes on Halloween went from blending in to stay hidden to some of the, garish or cutesy get-ups that you see today.
Those are good questions. I'll do when did trick-or-treating become a part of Halloween? And here we're talking about American Halloween. And it was fairly recently, 1940s, maybe. It became very popular. Some people may have been out in the 30s doing it, but I would say by mid-1940s to mid-1950s, it became a coast-to-coast phenomenon. And here's how it happened. Kids were always out doing mischief on Halloween. And the town fathers between the 2 world wars, the town fathers and mothers decided that this was not going to fly anymore, and they needed to distract the kids from pulling mischief around Halloween. So they started to throw parties. It was everybody, mothers' clubs, fathers' clubs, Kiwanis, mooses, schools, churches, dancing schools, everyone threw a Halloween party thinking that if we get the kids inside in the light where we can see them, a lot less mischief will happen outside under cover of darkness. So there was this effort to bring the kids inside. It didn't work. So the kids were still out doing whatever they were doing, dressing up in disguise and going around causing a lot of mischief and ultimately vandalism. And so the next idea that actually did work was they're coming to your house anyway. They're going to throw an egg at it or a cabbage at your door, or they're going to tie a rope across your front steps or maybe steal them. So turn on your porch light, give them something good to eat. And so it was kind of preemptive. And a few people thought, hey, this might work. And they tried it and they reported success. It was not instantly successful coast to coast. Many homeowners saw it as extortion. And even some kids saw it as begging and didn't want to go out begging. But over the course of time, the American media got into it and kind of taught people how to do it properly. So you have, for example, in 1952, this great cartoon called Trick or Treat. It's a Donald Duck cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
And his 3 nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, basically go out and show everybody how to trick or treat. This is what you do. You have a bag. You ask politely. And that went in movie theaters coast to coast, and then was on television. So millions of people saw that. Or there's an old Ozzie and Harriet show where kids show up at their door saying trick or treat, and they don't know what to do. So America was kind of educated through its popular culture until everybody knew what to do, and more porch lights were going on. But in my opinion, the thing that legitimized it completely was Unicef, Trick or Treat for Unicef,
mm-hmm.
which started in 1950 but grew very, very popular by 1960, where it was a charitable thing to do trick-or-treating. You're going to be out, you're going to be asking for candy, ask for money too. It's a good thing. And so it almost became un-American not to turn your porch light on and welcome kids at your house trick-or-treating. And so, that was the heyday of it in the 50s and 60s when everybody went trick-or-treating.
I can tell you as a middle school teacher, I can kind of understand that original concept that people were going for to get the kids out of mischief. Yeah. That's funny.
There was a second question, though, that was, when did it go from disguise to...
Mm-hmm.
Well, that kind of, that is such a good point that the first costumes, for children anyway, were disguises, and you were meant to guess who it was inside the costume. And now it's completely flipped for both kids and adults. Your costume is meant to express some part of you that people might not ordinarily see, like, your legs or whatever. And that happened with our popular, costumes have followed our popular culture since the first manufactured costumes. When they were homemade, they were all over the map. You decided what you wanted to be for Halloween and you built it yourself, and it usually involved a mask so nobody could tell who you were, or some sort of head covering out of buckram or cloth or something. And then when manufacturing got into it, then we had to have categories, comic character categories, or superheroes, or people types like pirates and gypsies and hobos and clowns. And so things got more similar. So you could choose from certain things. You weren't inventing it yourself, but you were choosing your costume. And I think that was the beginning of the change from disguise to expression, because you get to choose who you want to be. And then you can just watch it with popular culture just get more and more violent and more sexualized and more creative as we ride each new cultural wave.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that people get attached to when it comes to their traditions of Halloween is the symbols, the black cat, the witch, the bat, and, of course, the jack-o'-lantern. Where did some of these symbols come from, and do they come and go or change over time?
Well, the witch has been with us since the beginning, and that in particular image came out of Scotland, I'd say, in the 16th century, beginning with witch trials, which kind of ravaged Europe for a while between the mostly 1500s and 1700s, where people were being accused of witchcraft. Well, Scotland had recently become Protestant, and they jettisoned their Catholic beliefs, which involved a lot of praying for the dead and ghosts and things like that. And so when the Scots thought about supernatural, they went immediately to witchcraft, and they saw it everywhere. And I'll give you an example about how witch crazy the Scots were. In Scotland during the witch craze, they put around 4,000 people to death for the crime of witchcraft. In Ireland, a Catholic country at that time, maybe 10, 20 miles across the sea, there were 4. So it shows you the cultural differences. The Scots were witch crazy. And so the Scots were also when the very first Halloween literature came about. And these were stories by Sir Walter Scott, a particular poem by Robert Burns that became very popular. The literature started to feature Halloween and witches together. And that's what we inherited, this idea that a witch was out riding around on Halloween came from Scottish literature and Scottish witch trial testimony. And it stuck, and the witch has been with us ever since then, although, she's changed shape and image and color and purpose through time, but that's been a pretty steady Halloween symbol. And the cat, because of the witch, because the cat is a witch is familiar in folklore, and so the two of them go together. Also, the cat's dark and nocturnal, as is the bat, which is, I think, why that got associated with Halloween, is it's also part of that witchcraft. There are bats in witch spells and cats next to witches. Pumpkins, that's different. The jack-o'-lantern started first as a light, a moving light. What we call jack-o'-lantern now has nothing to do with what jack-o'-lantern used to be. It was swamp gas. It was a flame that you would see sometimes in churchyards or marshes or anywhere there's decaying matter. A little blue flame. And if you tried to follow it, it would disappear. It was come and go. And they called it a jack-o'-lantern after perhaps a man with a lantern that was, moving around. You cannot catch this light. You cannot follow it. It's a mysterious light. It's a chemical phenomenon, and it exists all over the world. But in northwestern Europe, it was called a jack-o'-lantern light or a will-o'-the-wisp or a corpse candle. If you know Smeagol in the Twin Towers in Lord of the Rings, he encountered some corpse candles on the way to Mordor. And they got all this folklore around them, like don't follow them, they're souls of the dead, they're dangerous, they'll lead you into a ditch. But this flickering light has nothing to do with a pumpkin and a candle. So you have to come over here to this country in the autumn under the cover of darkness, where kids would take leftover pumpkins, carve a face in them, 2 or 3, put in a candle, hang it on a stick, and then float it in front of someone's window to scare the bejesus out of them. Now remember, it's dark, not electricity. And so this was a trick. It was called the pumpkin trick. And then the kids run away. Over time, that trick got to be called jack-o'-lantern because you saw it and then it disappeared. And then it started to become a stable thing, like something you put on your porch and it doesn't move. When the Victorians started throwing parties and they were looking for party decorations, and carved pumpkins were a brilliant idea. They saw the kids had made them. Oh, what a great decoration. The pumpkin, the jack-o'-lantern, got put on the porch and it didn't move again.
I love it. I have to ask you, I've always wondered where, to me, the scarecrow has kind of been disappearing from our autumn or Halloween culture, and maybe that's more of kind of a harvest thing. But growing up, I remember making several scarecrows with my family around Halloween. I remember the Beistel scarecrow centerpiece from the 80s. I think it was a reprint. And we always had that in the center of the dining room table. So I often wonder what happened to the scarecrow. And then a few weeks ago, we made a visit to my small hometown as we're driving through. And we notice scarecrows all over the place. So I'm wondering, is it just a small town or maybe a regional thing?
You know, it's an interesting thing, the scarecrow, because it isn't essentially Halloween. It doesn't have anything to do. You're right. It's a harvest symbol, but because these things happen at the same time in certain parts of the world, they conflate. So we have scarecrows around Halloween, and they make perfect sense, but you're right that they're coming back. People are loving scarecrows more, and I've seen more scarecrow festivals, let's say, in the past 10 years than I have in the previous 15 that I've been following Halloween.
Wow, scarecrow festivals?
Scarecrow festivals.
Wow.
Yes, I think there's one in Illinois that's pretty famous near Chicago. But, you know, why not? They're really creative. You can dress them in all sorts of different ways. They can be made in all sorts of different ways. I don't see why not.
So I guess I must just be living in a region that is not into scarecrows, apparently.
Yeah, although I would think, you know, the more rural, the more prevalent scarecrows would be, but maybe that's not true.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got them in our dollar stores out here, and people have them in their yards, the kind that you can buy. Kind of at the beginning of fall, they go up. But nobody's making real scarecrows here. I'm on the East Coast.
Yeah.
People are definitely carving pumpkins and arranging pumpkins and birds and things like that, but not so much scarecrows. It's a shame. I make mine.
I haven't made one in years.
Really? Well, I cheat. I'm not making it out of straw. I'm making it out of, like, plastic stuffing and stuff. But it's a scarecrow. It stands in the yard. It's on a pole.
There you go. It's going to scare somebody.
It's going to scare somebody.
So let's say I'm living in Victorian America. You know, I told you I was coming back to this. My favorite era that I'd love to time travel to. I can't help but picture the scene depicting Halloween in the movie Meet Me in St. Louis, even though that's, you know, a little late. But let's say it's October. All Hallows Eve is approaching. What kinds of things would I be planning? And what would I likely be doing to celebrate the season?
Okay. Well, I would say if you're going to have a party, if you want to have fun, you're going to have a party. And what you're going to do to decorate is bring everything you can find outdoors inside. So that includes bales of hay and foliage, pumpkins, gourds, cabbages, anything that you can find outdoors that's natural this time of year, bring it in. Even evergreen boughs, which were popular at Halloween parties during that time. You have a crate full of live turkeys? Put those in the corner of your room. People have. And then fun guests release them. As far as food, it's because, you know, not so much the trucking and things that we have now. It's whatever's coming out of your garden at that time. So there's a lot of cabbages and pumpkin things and the round apples, nuts that are around that time of year. And they love to play games. And so on Halloween, Robert Burns left us this poem. It's basically a blueprint for how to celebrate Halloween in the Highlands of Scotland. in, 1600. And the Victorians loved this poem. They loved Robert Burns because they loved Scotland. They thought it was as exotic as Fiji or Borneo. And they loved this little holiday that seemed to have to do with ghosts in the other world because Victorians loved, this is a time of seances. They were fascinated with ghosts. So here's this perfect holiday for them. So when they decorated, first costumes may have been ghosts that, you have your friends outside dressed as ghosts, greeting guests as they come in. And the games that came from Burns's poem were the games that they tried to adapt for their Halloween parties, such as fortune-telling games like peeling an apple in one long pairing and throwing it over your shoulder, seeing what initial it falls in, and that's to be the initial of your true love, or filling bowls with different substances, water, dirt, flower petals, and blindfold choose one of the bowls, and that determines your future, whether you're going to die a maid or get married or be a widow, fun games, dropping wax into water and trying to foretell the future in the shapes that the wax makes. And then if you're really bold, go downstairs into a dark basement with a candle and a mirror and an apple, and eat the apple in candlelight in front of the mirror. And at the stroke of midnight on Halloween, you are supposed to be able to see the face of your future spouse behind your left shoulder. This is the sort of thing you might do.
Some of those customs that you tell about in your first book just are really so funny to me. Like, explain the concept of the dumb supper, because that is pretty darn hilarious to me. And the more I've looked into dumb suppers, they did them at different times of the year. But, it's like there are certain days on the calendar where you do certain things, and they're magical days in your mind. And Halloween's definitely one of them. And a dumb supper, if you wanted to find out who you were going to marry, or in some cases, if you wanted to communicate with the dead, you make a dinner, some sort of supper in silence, and you serve it, you set the table, set an extra place, kind of like for Elijah, but this is for your future spouse, let's say, and you serve it backwards. You have to walk in backwards and serve the plate backwards. You serve a plate to this empty chair. You eat it in silence and possibly in darkness or dim candlelight. And the image of your future love should enter and sit down and eat with you. I've never come across an instance where this actually happened, but plenty of people get scared enough that they think something happens. I was going to say, yeah, nothing creepy at all about doing that. Nothing at all.
And, when you think about it, it's like it's not a ghost. This person hopefully is alive that you're destined to marry. So it's an out-of-the-body experience that comes to the table.
Hardcore supernatural right there.
Yeah.
In the first book, or your first book, you included a 1911 article from the Delineator, which opened this whole new world of looking for old magazines and things about Halloween. But it was called A Halloween Housewarming, that talked about decorating and entertaining for the holiday. I blogged about it, and I think about it every year. How did you come about finding some of these old articles and magazines?
Well, it was when I wrote that Halloween history, it was pre-internet. And so I wrote that on a typewriter, and research that you have to do pre-internet, now it seems absolutely crazy to do this, but of course everyone did, was you're in the library, in the archives. And what I was lucky enough to live in Boston. The Boston Public Library has one of the largest collections of old periodicals on microfiche.
Mm-hmm.
And tiny little images, about smaller than a postage stamp, that you put into a machine and you view and you crank through the pages, microfilms and microfiche. And so those early magazines were not indexed, so it's not like you can look at the front page and go, okay, is there anything having to do with Halloween here? No, there's not. And you go through each page. page by page, looking for the word Halloween. And so that's how I found a lot of them, and I got very good at scanning a page and just seeing an H wherever it was. That. But I will say it was months and months and months of microfilm in the basement of the Boston Public Library. And thank goodness they put these things on film.
Oh, yeah.
They're paper. They would be gone.
Mm-hmm. And I'm really surprised that there are some of these issues that are still around, that you can find, vintage. I don't know that I'll ever get my hands on one, but it's fun to kind of search around and find them and read them.
Yes, it is. And there are good copies in libraries around, but as far as I can tell, no one library has everything, which is frustrating. You can go, there are libraries at Harvard where they keep old periodicals, but if you go to Godey's Lady's Book, they'll have issues from, 1860 and then one from 1868, one from 1893. You can't see the whole scope. That's why the Boston Public Library microfilm department was so important. I could see it year to year. Wow.
What are some of the urban myths about Halloween that maybe have been, years later have been explained away? It makes me think of, always hearing about razor blades and apples and things like that.
That one stuck around for a long time. You don't hear it anymore, do you? No. I'm happy for that because you're right. It was an urban myth. And the myth was this, that there was a adult psycho in your neighborhood who was out to put razor blades in the apples of innocent children coming to their door. So the fear behind, like most urban legends have some sort of real fear behind them or are cautionary in some way. And this one, the fear was, do we really know our neighbors? And it became popular at a time where a lot of cases of child abuse were becoming public, and people started to fear for their children and fear each other. So the actual psycho, Halloween sadist, does not exist. There was never anyone who was doing that. But what happened, and folklorists call this death by folklore, is that people hear about it and then they do it. And again, not adults. There's never been a razor blade in an apple put there by an adult and given to a child. But copycat things with kids sometimes happened where children would try to play tricks on their brothers and sisters and put things in apples. And it became so widely publicized that just about everybody out there has heard of somebody that this happened to. So that's the way urban myths work. They're not real. They become real. They get incredibly publicized, and then everybody's heard about it, that this does happen. It does. Well, it doesn't. What happens is that a kid put a pin in an apple and gave it to a brother, and the brother told the parents, and the parents freaked out, and it gets into the newspaper. That was one, and I'm happy to see that kind of die down because, I love the idea that trick-or-treating is going to houses of people you don't necessarily know or your neighbors. I mean, that's what draws neighborhoods together at Halloween. And to lose that, and for a while it was in danger when all these rumors were rampant, it's good to see that kind of fade away.
Yeah.
Black cats being kidnapped for satanic sacrifice, also not the case, but we were at one point terrified of satanic sacrifice. And remember the mutilated cows? Weird things were happening in the news. And here comes Halloween, and so it all gets reported there. So when you look at black cats on Halloween and danger to black cats on Halloween, you can't find any. What you can find is that maybe in March there was a brown cat that some kids had, done something horrible to, but it gets reported at Halloween. So we kind of tie it up with Halloween in our imaginations. And I know shelters that won't adopt black cats at Halloween, even now.
I know. I see things on social media a lot around this time saying, talking about that.
Yeah, but for the shelter's point of view, it's better safe than sorry.
Yeah.
And for the reality of it, it almost doesn't matter what's true or not. If perception is they're in danger, then we act as if they're in danger.
Sometimes you hear about religious groups or evangelicals protesting Halloween, and, they may claim that it's a celebration of evil or something along those lines. Has that element always existed this time of year, or is this a relatively new thing?
That's a good question. It has not always existed. In fact, churches were among the very first who had haunted houses and Halloween parties. Churches and Halloween always were fine. Schools and Halloween were always fine. It changed when the evangelical Christians became more vocal, which happened kind of in the 60s towards the 70s. And major figures like Pat Robertson came out talking about Halloween and saying we should just stop doing this. And Halloween glorifies the devil. And I've talked to many people who believe that that's true. And belief is belief. If they believe that, then that is true for them. For myself, it's a secular holiday. I don't see any religion in it as far as how Americans celebrate it. But you do, among some people, they do see it as religious. Some people see Halloween as a religious holiday. Some people see it as a secular holiday. I would say most people. You find the religious interpretations of it on the far left and on the far right. So it's the evangelical Christians who don't want to celebrate Halloween because they believe it glorifies the devil. And you see the neo-pagans, the modern pagans, who believe Halloween is a spiritual time to communicate with the ancestors. Mm-hmm. So on both sides, it's religious or spiritual. And in the middle, for everybody else, it's about creativity, candy, costume.
So maybe a lot of times people are just confused about what it is, so they just avoid it.
Yeah, what it is, it almost, that's just such a good point. It's, what I believe Halloween is my, I think that's true. But if you talk to an evangelical Christian who believes that it glorifies the devil, to them, that is also true. Mm-hmm. So it's really hard to say. Mm-hmm. It's something you express. Halloween is an expressive holiday. So to some degree, you have to give it meaning.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Your book, the first book, was originally printed almost 25 years ago in 1990. What are the changes and differences that you've noticed since the book was first released?
Gosh, Halloween has gotten, it's no secret that it's huge business now. Mm-hmm. The kind of marketing and money that's spent on Halloween is mind-numbingly huge. Everything about Halloween has gotten bigger. It's gotten, adults celebrate it way more than they did when I first wrote the book, way more. The whole haunted house industry was born and escalated during that time. The idea of having a costume for a pet or an infant wasn't even heard of back then, really. Mm-hmm. And now, just costumes for pets are something like $330 million we spend on them. Even parades, back when I started, there were Halloween parades, and there were some wonderful Halloween parades, but now they're everywhere. There weren't mazes, there weren't pumpkin patches or pumpkin festivals. Everything about it, from events for kids to events for adults, has grown in number. At the same time, it's gone out of the schools and pretty much out of the churches, where it used to first be. The first Halloween parties, the most Halloween parties were in schools and churches, and now that doesn't happen so much.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say, people should, if they're looking for kind of a follow-up, your Halloween Nation book, I think you'd probably agree, has a lot of what comes after 1990 in our American culture. Great book, and a lot of pictures and very colorful, awesome book.
Thank you. That was absolutely the most fun to write.
I bet. You probably had to experience a lot of things to write about it for that book.
I did, and I had to meet a lot of people, and I can tell you, I could probably count on two fingers the Halloween people I've met who are not fun. Everyone is wonderful. Everyone. And generous. It's just, that's what always blows me away about Halloween after all this time, is how generous people are when it comes to Halloween. I mean, we get nothing tangible back for decorating our yards and spending $500 on candy and entertaining the whole neighborhood, but people do it because it's good. It's a very generous thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we end the interview? Is there something you feel like you just want to share?
There's nothing I want to share. I just want to know how you came to be so interested in Halloween.
Well, let me just tell you, one of the things, I even said it in one of my last interviews, I'm very nostalgic in general. And what I remember are, those flashes, the smells and the random, kind of visuals. And one thing that always takes me back to Halloween is if you smell a roll of duct tape, and I know that sounds really silly. If you smell a roll of duct tape, which I have around quite often for my job, it takes me back to those Halloween masks. Just they smelled horrible. And but that's where I go every time there's a roll of duct tape around. I know exactly what you mean, and the feeling of that horrible sweaty face you get under one of those masks, and your own breathing is coming back at you, making a fog. Yeah, and also the smell of those first cheap latex masks, that sweet rubber. That I know exactly what you mean. So why don't you share with us anything you want to, if you've got anything coming up, anything to promote, and maybe where we can find you, or social media links or anything like that?
All right. You can always find me at iskullhalloween.com, and that's spelled out ISKULL Halloween.com. That's my website. I'll be doing part of an interview on the BBC on Halloween Day twice, called a Halloween Hoolie, about Halloween in Ireland. That should be pretty entertaining. And just check out the History Channel this year. They always run the real story of Halloween somewhere around Halloween, if not on Halloween night. And that's a good show.
I've seen it many times. It's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. You are amazing, and people definitely should check out your books. And I would love to be a fly on the wall and follow you around on the Halloween season. I bet it would be a blast to see.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
You rock.
Thank you. You too, Patrick.
Oh, look. We've got listener feedback. Well, what did you think of that? I've been such a fan of Lesley's ever since I heard her interview with Jim Harold on the Paranormal Podcast several years back. It's a great interview if you have a chance to find it and listen to it. Well, this is the 18th episode of the Big Seance Podcast. I've worked really hard, but I've also had such a good time producing it. And when I think of the people that I've had the opportunity to talk to and have discussions with in the last couple of months, and when I read the feedback from listeners, it really makes me excited to keep going. I want to take this opportunity to really thank you for listening, especially to those regular listeners that have been sticking with me as the podcast grows and changes and improves, or I hope I continue to improve anyway. I'd love to convince you to do something very easy for me today. Are you a regular listener? Will you send me an email or voicemail or even a message through SpeakPipe with 2 simple bits of information? Number 1, let me know where you are listening from. And 2, how do you listen? Are you on a smartphone? Your computer? Is it through iTunes, Stitcher? Maybe you're even listening through something like the podcast app. I'd love to get some stats on some of these things. And I'd just love to hear from you anyway. I mean, feel free to give me some feedback as well. But where you're listening from and how exactly you're listening would be something I'd be very interested in finding out. Now, speaking of feedback, recently I discovered a glowing review on iTunes that I'm so very honored to get. I only wish I knew exactly who you were so that I could thank you more personally. TAK1313, or TAKK1313, on iTunes says, This is my new favorite podcast. I love the content and look forward to more. Patrick is an amazing host, and his guests are always very informative and remarkable. Every time I listen to this, I brew a pot of tea and light candles and visualize a Victorian parlor gathering at my tea table whilst I sip tea and engross myself in the podcast's content. Keep up the amazing work. I look forward to more shows to keep me company whilst I sip tea and knit. Thanks for the fun. Wow. That might be the most perfect description of what I was going for with this whole big seance theme in the first place. Well, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much, TAC1313. Once again, the incredibly Halloweeny music you've been hearing in this episode is by Samhain and is used by permission. The track you're listening to now is actually one that I've been addicted to in the last few days. I think I'd probably listen to it whether it was Halloween or not, actually. But anyway, you can find information about Sam and his really cool Halloween music at hauntmusic.co.uk. Next week, our final Halloween episode, one that has been an ongoing project in the last month or two. Several supporters of the podcast, along with former guests, have provided me with their favorite memories and traditions of Halloween. I plan on sharing some of my own favorite memories and stories as well. Now, we've been hitting Halloween awfully hard this month, and so if Halloween isn't your thing, and you've been wondering just when things will get back to whatever normal is, then have no fear. After next week, look forward to a 2-part interview with Edwin F. Becker, author of the best-selling book, True Haunting, which is an amazing true story of a famous haunted house. Be sure to check back in for that. The ghosts and goblins are on their way. You rock. For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com, now the home of both the blog and the podcast. Just click on the Big Seance Podcast logo or find it in the menu. You can also find and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Do you have any comments or feedback? Please contact me at patrick@bigseance.com. You can call my feedback line at 7755-TELL-ME. That's 775-583-5563. You can also record audio feedback right from the site using the SpeakPipe link included in the show notes. I could decide to include your voice in a future show. Thank you so much for listening and reading. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time.